What if the locked door in a haunted house wasn't meant to be opened? In this scary story, Daniel hears whispers and scratching from the dark. Something waits inside, a faceless shadow that knows his name. Welcome back to The House That Whispers, a horror story series inside a haunted mansion. This is episode 2, The Locked Door. Shadows move, whispers crawl, and the darkness is alive. On the third day of his stay, Daniel roamed the east wing of the mansion, an area he hadn't yet explored. He carried a dim lantern, its flame shivering with every draft that crept through the cracks in the walls. But at the very end of the corridor, almost hidden behind a layer of torn wallpaper, Daniel saw it. A door. At first there was nothing, just the faint groaning of the old house shifting on its bones. But then, Daniel froze. The sound came from inside the room, long slow strokes, as though something was dragging its claws against the other side of the door. The scratching grew louder. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. Something was trapped inside that room, and it wanted out. Daniel staggered back, clutching the lantern tight. His uncle's words echoed faintly in his mind. Never stay past midnight. That was all the villagers had told him before he inherited the estate. No details, no explanations, just a warning. And now, staring at this bolted door, Daniel wondered if this sealed prison was the reason why. Driven by a mixture of dread and compulsion, Daniel reached for the iron bolts. His fingers brushed the cold metal. It was ice cold, colder than any part of the house had a right to be. Every so often, drifting through the walls, he heard it again. He tried to drown it out with drink. He tried to convince himself it was all in his imagination. But when the grandfather clock struck midnight, Daniel's lantern flickered. The whispers erupted all around him. Not from the door upstairs, not from the walls, but from inside his head. Daniel, open it! Free us! He covered his ears, but the voices only grew louder. Suddenly, something had moved. Something had escaped the confines of that locked door. Daniel gripped his lantern and stumbled into the hallway, heart hammering. The whispers guided him, pulling him up the staircase toward that cursed corridor. But as he reached the hallway, he froze. At the far end, just before the bolted door, stood a shadow. It was tall, thin. Its edges rippled as though it wasn't entirely solid. And though it had no face, Daniel knew it was looking at him. The lantern shook in his hand. His knees threatened to give way. But before he could move, the shadow stepped closer. The whispers returned, louder than ever. He sees us. He hears us. He is next. Daniel screamed and stumbled backward, tripping over the step. The lantern smashed against the floor. Darkness swallowed him. Only the whispers remained. When Daniel opened his eyes, he was no longer lying on the stairs. He was inside the locked room. The bolts remained sealed from the outside. But somehow, he was inside. The whispers surrounded him, circling in the darkness. And from the farthest corner of the room, something moved. Daniel's voice trembled. Who's there? The answer came not in words, but in a breath against his ear. To be continued. Daniel is trapped inside the haunted room, surrounded by whispers and shadows. The faceless figure draws closer, and the horror story continues in episode 3, The Shadows.